Can everybody see my screen? If someone could just, I don't know, unmute and,
Yeah.
okay, good. So Jay, you want to get started?
Okay, Halito, Chima Chukma. Hello, I hope you all are well. Yakoke Ishto, thank you very much for joining us. Achatasia, Aoklasia, Aditasia, Atushkasia, Sahuchifo Yat, Jason Campos Kik, Sahuchifo Yat, Nita Achu, Sahuchifo Yat, Okla Itushka. And so I'm going to give you some of the when we started learning how to facilitate this type of work, there were 4 agreements to having courageous conversations that we're taught, and then we're going to also add a couple agreements from our own teachings. So the first one is stay engaged. Staying engaged means remaining morally, emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue. 2 is be willing to experience discomfort. This norm acknowledges that discomfort is inevitable, especially in dialogue about race, and that participants make a commitment to bring issues into the open. It is not talking about these issues that create divisiveness. The divisiveness already exists in the society and in our schools. It is through dialogue, even when uncomfortable, the healing and change begin. The third is speak your truth. This means being open about thoughts and feelings and not just saying what you think others would like to hear. 4 is expect and accept non-closure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in the uncertainty and not rush to quick solutions, especially in relation to racial understanding, which requires ongoing dialogue. And then there's 6 other ones that they talk about, which is focus on personal, local, and immediate. 2, isolate race. 3, normalize social construction in multiple perspectives. 4, monitor agreements, conditions, and establish parameters. 5, use a working definition for race. 6, examine the presence and role of whiteness. And so those are the ones from the professionals, the educated folk. I'll just tell you from our own teachings, there's some things that work when we have these dialogues for us. And one is, and you got to understand, we're coming from a land that had many cultures and many beliefs and many creation stories. And we know that before the 500-year dark ages, there was lots of trade and there was lots of being in relationship. And so we had to understand the differences of each other and accept them. And so for me, this shows up in come with an empty plate. I imagine every culture has some kind of understanding of this. The way I can physically put it in your mind is I invite you to you move on to the block, the neighborhood invites, has a party, the host neighbor invites everybody to the barbecue, and they spend all this time cleaning their yard, their house, preparing this wonderful food. I'm pretty much sure nobody has ever thought, well, unless it was a potluck, we're not talking about a potluck, I'm sure nobody comes and said, I brought the best barbecue you ever had. Thanks for inviting me. So come with an empty plate kind of translates to that. The other one is don't take things personal here, because none of this is personal. If we're honoring the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we know that he said often that the oppression systems not only harmed the oppressed, but they harmed the generations of the oppressors as well. And so we understand this, right? We're not attacking a person, a people. We're attacking a system, and a system that has never properly been healed on this continent, and I'd say in the world right now. And so this is not something to take personally. I'll give you an example. My greatest heroes, my 6 greatest heroes, And I'm going backward, not forward, because now they're my children. But my 6 greatest heroes backward are my parents, all 4 of my grandparents, and all 8 of those great-grandparents that I either met as a young baby, child, or was told their stories. Those are my heroes. Not a one of those 2-legged individuals I've mentioned came without flaws, came without imperfection. And I'll say all of those 2-legged individuals I've mentioned came with trauma. And so then when I talk about myself, who I'm trying to be my own hero in this age, I come with imperfections, flaws, and a heavy portion of trauma. And so that goes for anybody, regardless of race. There's different degrees of it, but you can understand that we are not attacking people. We're actually trying to heal people. And so we have to attack systems to do that, because as we've experienced, if we just let the systems and the way it's always been continue, the healing is very difficult and it's on the individual. And so being in a community, we would like the community to be able to heal together. The third one is action. So I always do an action. Usually we start with a prayer, but we understand that there are so many beliefs on this call. There are so many generational teachings on this call. There are so many different ideas on this call. So rather than start it out and just pick one, I will say that, again, from coming from a land base, when we got our traditional beliefs back and elders started revealing creation stories and all the old stories and teachings that were once thought lost, we realized how many differences and how much diversity it was in, even between tribal nations. And so I'm going to just do some of the teaching without doing an actual specific prayer. Oh, but one of the things that was understood in that diversity is that at the core, all of those different stories and beliefs were teaching 2-leggeds some core principles, which was about, compassion, selflessness, taking care of each other, looking out for each other, respecting each other, feelings, things, and opinions, right? And so if we're going to have to translate this globally, we're going to have the same mindset. And so rather than do a specific prayer, I'm just going to put you all into an action. And this action is based on what we call the 4 things that in my teaching, the Creator gives us upon our entrance into the world. And so the first thing that we're given is breath. If you ever go to any kind of pregnancy, a lot of times, I don't know if they do it anymore, but back in the day, they used to smack the child in the butt until the child cried out. And I don't think they were trying to introduce them to violence right away. I think they were trying to make sure that that child was breathing well. And so I'm just going to ask you to take in 4 breaths through the nose and then out through the mouth when I say now. Notice I did them very slow. One more time. So those breaths were specifically slower than you're just breathing, because you go throughout the day, you take hundreds and hundreds of breaths in a day. How often do you think about those breaths? And how often do you reflect on the fact that that's a very sacred gift of your creation? Even if you're an atheist and you just believe in the science of your creation, that's the first thing coming out the womb is that breath of fresh air. And so I want you to be able to use that tool when you do get uncomfortable, when you do get bogged down by this crazy world. And when you do get in these uncomfortable spaces and have to remind yourself that this is solidarity building and healing. The second one, we would say it's the good mind. In the good mind, there's actually, our Haudenosaunee people up in the Northeast Woodlands, the founders or creators of that great law of peace, which our own declaration is modeled after, except for the fact that they don't respect women and they don't respect the vulnerable in their decision making. But the great law of peace was similar, but we respected the women. They had the last word, the grandmothers and the clan mothers. And we respected the vulnerable's opinion at the table. And so their actual name translated from their 5 or 6 now languages, 6 nations, languages, their creator or their God is the good mind. That's actually what it translates to. So on the good mind, I just ask you to close your eyes and put your mind into a quietness, an emptiness. And hold into this emptiness until there's nothing from your day or from your week or from your life that is in the way, that is a distraction. And then I just ask you to open your eyes really quick because, you know, when you do this on your own and you need to find that mental peace on your own, once you get that quiet place, once you get that empty place, that undistracted place, you can put actual images in that place that make you feel peaceful. You could put the forest if that's your place. You could put the beach or the water if that's your place. You could put, you know, grandma's house when you were a kid if that's your place. But that's how we bring ourselves back to the good mind. So, you know, the breath and the good mind could be used together in unison and bring you back into that place of peace and harmony. The third gift, and some will say that might even came before breath, but it's the emotional gift. So we put it as the third, and that would be the heartbeat. You hear that heartbeat when you're still in the womb. So for the action for this, I'd like you to just put your hand, right hand, on the left side of your chest or center of your chest or wherever you believe your heart beats the strongest. And just feel that thing, right? In our stories, in our teachings, they say that the heartbeat is the drum of creation that's given to every living thing. They say that it can beat in harmony at times with Creator itself, and it could beat in harmony at times with Mother Earth herself, or Grandmother Earth herself. And so when you feel bogged down and the breath doesn't work and the mind doesn't get clear, and you're just completely frustrated and you know, boggled by this crazy world and this crazy experience called life, I invite you to put your hand on your chest, feel that drum, feel that heartbeat. And if it's still beating, then you have more time to work it all out, no matter how frustrating. And the last thing, this is going to cause you to actually get off I'm going to give you guys time because you might be technologically deficient like myself. Find your little camera box and come off of camera. We don't care how you look here. This is a judgment-free zone right here. Come off camera if you can. And if you can't, for the sake of time, you're going to go through the exercise with us. We might not see you, but you'll see yourself being silly. I want you to look up into the camera like a silly little kid that just figured out what this computer thing is and doesn't know what the heck is going on in there. Look up right into the thing. And in honor of the Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I want you to reach into the camera and say, I love you.
I love you.
Wonderful.
I'm scrolling through this so I can
love
see
you.
everybody. I love you.
So that fourth gift is the gift of a voice. And you know, we're not talking about a physical voice because we have symbols and sign languages for our folks that aren't born with a physical voice. They can still express that voice that we're all given. And if you think about it, that voice is a very powerful tool. It's a very two-sided tool. It can hurt people. It can hurt feelings. It can silence other people if you dominate your voice. But if you understand that voice is what we sing with, that voice is what we speak our prayers with, that voice is what we communicate our admiration and our love for one another with, which we just did right there. And so I want you to hold on to that. You just said I love you to like 70 plus people that you will never know. And that is what we are getting at here today. There's a globe of 7 billion trillion zillion, I don't know. I don't study the books and the stats and the numbers, but I know that there's billions of living things, not just two-legged. There's flying things, there's swimming things, there's crawling and jumping things, and we were all created for a purpose. And so remember to bring, when you're using your voice, to use it responsibly. Put that love into it. You don't have to know somebody to know that they were created for a reason. And that is one way that healing is done. Thank you for your time. I'm gonna hand it over to my wife.
Okay, don't leave.
No, I'm just kidding.
So Meku everybody. Makudamin Chin Kyohei no home PP say Mima Crystal. So thank you so much. To tell you the truth, I really thought we were going to do something different, but because of the loss, or not loss, but the outcome of the Buc-ee's situation, it really made me think about some of these communities, like the cities and towns and county commissioners, do not really respect the Indigenous community around. And so, you know, I thought about it the whole week about what could I do, or what could we do to try to help. And that's what we're doing, is building community. I'm so glad each and every one of you are here. We are recording this so you can go back to it. This is, you know, new. You know, we've researched. I'm here in Arizona right now, taking the Native Nations Institute, Rebuilding Nations courses, because I want to come back and help my community and other communities. And so, you know, we envision cities where Indigenous knowledge, perspectives, and sovereignty are respected, where Native people feel safe and are healthy, where everybody feels safe and healthy, where Indigenous people can practice our religions, we can practice access to traditional medicines, where we can practice fishing and hunting and land management, where sacred places are protected, landscapes are protected, where we have access to clean water, clean air, all of us, where our languages are thriving, where everyone has what they need for a high quality of life, and where our community members that are not Native are knowledgeable about our communities, history, and contributions. And so we wanted to create this this presentation for you guys. So bear with me. We're going to probably take a couple of breaks, but bear with me. We're going to have an interactive conversation. Usually we like to be in person because we just like to feel everybody's energy, give love, and just have these safe spaces. So here are the slides, and I can share these slides with you. We're going to talk about terms to be familiar with, account for historical and modern, let's see, I'm sorry, my diversity, account for history of harm and erasure, today's Indigenous community challenges, how cities, towns, and communities address challenge, municipal case studies, formal nation to municipal relations, and recommended reading, and then acknowledgement. So I'm gonna move over here. So you want to talk about Seven Directions, or Jason and Crystal, or what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about how we became Seven Directions?
Yes. So if anybody doesn't know, about 6, 7 years ago, we got together. I met this beautiful, amazing woman. She was a council member, elected council member for her tribe. And I was far from my tribe and far from where I grew up, actually on the West Coast. My tribe's in Louisiana, but I grew up on the West Coast. And so anywhere I ever traveled, I would volunteer for the local tribal community. And I had been volunteering for quite some time. I knew her uncle, who was the traditional chief. And I met her at a powwow where she was vending crafts and I was dancing, which is healing, praying. That was the intention of the dancing I was doing there. And we got together within a year. We realized that we had similar purpose. And so both of us had our own children. We had both come from previous relationships. And so we didn't think it was responsible to waste a bunch of time and have our children in confusion. So we got married in about a year, started doing culture classes with all the libraries of all the 5 counties closest to the capital of North Carolina. So Durham County, Orange County, Chatham County, what are
Casual.
Alamance County and Casual County. And so we go to these libraries and we do these culture classes, and Crystal would do crafts on one day and teach how to make something, whether it be clothing, instruments, beads, art, baskets. And then on the opposite one, I would teach how to either sing, tell stories, dance, drum, more of more of that type. And then within about a year of that, we said we need to do something for the kids, because we got a lot of people, a lot of adults actually came to our culture classes, which was very cool, but we wanted the young people to have an understanding. So we created something called Saponi Stickball, which was a combination of my nation's two-stick stickball, the Six Nations lacrosse or sacred game, and an understanding that the Saponis were close enough to the Muskegee and Southeast Woodland territories down here that they probably had a stickball of sorts, just like the Cherokee do now. It's just been taken from them in colonization. So we called it Saponi Stickball, and we taught the kids all different kinds of stickball as a sacred game, but also something that they could take with them. We taught the Six Nation lacrosse stickball just so they could apply it in high school and college if they wanted to. Very soon after building that children's class, we realized that the MVP was coming close to the territory, and we would actually do water ceremonies, which was the tradition of stickball. Before stickball games and before stickball practices, the young people would go to the water and purify. And so we realized if the water was compromised by the MVP pipeline, it would compromise our whole integrity of our program. And so we went to the city council of Mebane, just like we did a couple weeks ago at Buc-ee's. And I wasn't supposed to mention that my wife was on the council. She wasn't supposed to speak because the council didn't give her permission to speak for the tribe. And I got so nervous when I went up there, and the guy asked me, well, how do you know that the tribe here doesn't like this pipeline coming through? And I said, because my wife's sitting right there. She's an elected council member. And that came out in the newspaper. And so quickly, rather than be at odds with her tribal government, she just resigned and said, I got elected to help my people. This is the best way to help my people. If I can't speak freely, then what am I doing anyway? And so she resigned. We started fighting the pipeline full speed ahead. But we were fighting the pipeline as Crystal and Jason, and we realized through our support of like Standing Rock and the Levee pipeline near my tribe in Louisiana, and all these past experiences from relatives, that the pipeline comes after you when you start affecting their money. And they come after you in very messed up ways. They just try to discredit you in the community, which happened to us. They try to go for your finances and any credit blemishes you might have, which happened to us. They try to threaten you and scare you, which happened to us. They send people into your community, which happened to us, and infiltrate you. And so we realized, like, we're going to end up getting sued by these guys, and we don't have, you can't take blood from a stone, right? We're responsible for 6 young children. And so we created 7 Directions of Service just to have an entity like sue that thing. Don't sue Jason and Crystal's family. Sue 7 Directions of Service. And so I'm saying it as like laughing, but 7 Directions of Service came much more prayerful than that. And we sat down and we prayed. We just decided the name based off of our 7 Directions principles. And then because we knew we were new in this, we went all the way up the pipeline to Virginia and met some allies that had been fighting it for years more than us. And then they took us up to West Virginia, and then we just kind of solidified this whole movement from West Virginia all the way to North Carolina and started fighting the pipeline together. And here we are.
Okay, thank you. That's my husband's long way of telling us how we got here. So thank you for being on this journey with us. So I will tell you, I used a lot of guides putting this together. One was from the National League of Cities, which I can share that resource with you at the end. It's in our acknowledgement slide. But it's just really talking about which ways can you be a good relative, which include promoting Indigenous organizations, stories, and voices in your community, working for honest and respectful solidarity, knowing whose homeland you are on, and most importantly, just listening and acting with humility. Like Jason said, you coming with an empty plate. And so we'll get started on this journey that we're going to talk for the next, I don't know, 45 minutes, and then we'll have open for questions. So yeah.
Open for dialogue.
Open for dialogue. So here's some terms I want you guys to be familiar with. Because, meeting different people across the United States and different areas, people have been like, what's the difference? So whenever possible, please use the tribe's specific name. So like our name is the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. That is who we are today. And we are a state recognized tribe. So when you're talking about that community or you're in our territory, refer to us by that name. Do know that over the course of colonization, some tribes, merged or absorbed or married into each other for the sake of survival. So that is the one thing. Federally recognized tribes. So according to the BIA, a federally recognized tribe is an American Indian or Alaskan Native tribal entity that is recognized as having a government-to-government relationship with the United States, with the responsibilities, powers, limitations, and obligations attached to that designation, which means they are eligible for funding and services from the BIA. State recognized tribes. That includes tribes or groups that are recognized by individual states for their various internal state government purposes. 11 states recognize more than 63 total tribal nations. Now, state recognition does not confer the same benefits as federal recognition, including guaranteed funding. State recognition acknowledges tribes' history and cultural contributions and may qualify the tribes for state and federal support. May. Okay, what is sovereignty? I did see a question in the chat about that. Sovereignty. Okay, sovereignty, it says the United States Constitution set the stage for tribal sovereignty as it exists now, noting that treaties made under its authority are the supreme law of the land. In the colonization period, sovereignty was inherent in the interactions between tribes and the developing government of the United States, right? So many legal cases which form federal Indian law today have firmly established the government-to-government relationship between the American Indian tribes and the U.S. government. And then finally, urban Indians or urban Indian centers are groups of people who currently live off federally defined tribal lands or off of their out of their tribal communities in urban populations areas, and we're often overlooked. So when we say in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Raleigh, North Carolina, or Richmond, North Carolina, or even Greensboro, most of those people have left their home and are living in a city because the city is providing a source of income for them or source of schooling or something better that made them leave home. And we'll talk about the periods later of how people moved and migrated off of reservations, whether they were forced or they just wanted to leave. Today, according to the US Census, approximately 71% of American Indians and Alaska Natives live in urban areas. Yes, Natalia, it is dependence on the U. Actually, it is claimed, right? The Marshall trilogies. Justice John Marshall said that tribes are a dependent on the United States. So yeah, you're right. So those are some things. And again, I can share these definitions with you afterwards. We can always have these conversations about, what's the difference between federal and state. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about are some guiding principles that will serve you when you engage in the communities, right? When you engage in, yeah, when you engage with tribal nations and indigenous peoples. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that help repair relationships with indigenous people. So number one, be informed of your community. Educate yourself about the tribes in your area and the urban Indians who have relocated to your area, right? So understand the shared history between your city and indigenous peoples, as well as present day struggles. Number two, like Jason was saying, practice cultural competency. Ask Native people what is appropriate conduct when meeting tribal elders, tribal leaders. They should be announced and seated in a respectful way to honor their position. So there's some common titles such as president, chief, chairperson, or governor. You want to ask them first if you can take their photo or touch their regalia or traditional clothing. What you don't want to do this without their permission. Avoid asking indigenous people to defend their tribal identity with questions about blood quantum or degree of Indian blood. You kind of want to avoid using really harsh terms, which I'm not going to talk about. But there's some terms, and we can have a whole nother conversation about what do you call those words when they're like
racial slurs?
Yeah, racial slurs, like
the team formerly known as in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. So there's some things that I've heard in meetings, such as low man on the totem pole, Indian giver, or spirit animal, or spirit gods. There's more, or yeah, powwow. There's more, but again, those are some things that kind of, I don't know, they're just not really nice. And be careful of asking individuals to speak for their whole community, and make sure to include spiritual leaders as well as government leaders for appropriate conduct.
So I'll just say that she says it's so southern and gentle. I will say, we always say ask for permission and wait to be invited. Just because you know that ask for permission and wait to be invited is the protocol, don't go asking permission to touch somebody's sacred regalia. You don't need to do it. It's not gonna give you anything. It's not gonna if anything, if you had a bad day in his belief or her belief, you transfer your bad day onto their regalia by touching it. So you don't need to touch their feathers. You don't need to touch their sacred items. The other piece is, she says it very politely that these are not nice. These actually cause harm. And I know that in some cultures, it is within the culture, it is okay, and I've heard this growing up in European culture, it's okay to say you're Italian, so I call you by the Italian slur, or you're Irish, so I call you by the Irish slur. And I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do with their life. If they have a tight group of friends and they're okay with slurring each other, that's fine. But publicly and in places that you don't know people, these cause harm. And in indigenous communities, I won't say it caused any more harm than one or the other because we're all human, but I'll tell you that indigenous communities have suffered an extra trauma over complexion, because we've had dark indigenous people, we've had light indigenous people. And so even those people, based on their complexion, have another form of of self-identity confusion. And so, you know, by you using these words and these slurs, it's harm causing. And so I'll just say, as a general practice, let's not use words that potentially cause harm to anyone. That's just a good human practice.
Yeah, you're right. The next one is listen to Native voices. So in your work, center Indigenous voices as you work to promote healing and justice, right? I know in these times that we live in, those words healing and justice really get under some people's skin. But make sure to include American Indians and Native Alaskans when making decisions and consult in good faith. The next one is respect responsibility. The trust doctrine is a legal source of federal responsibility to American Indians, requiring the federal government to support tribal self-government and economic prosperity. This doctrine also outlines the duties that stem from the government. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I just do not like the BIA, but they are there. But this government treaty guarantees to protect Indian tribes and respect their sovereignty. Now, towns, cities, some states, and municipalities are not bound by these treaties to support tribal self-government as the federal government is bound, but there is still a responsibility to respect tribal sovereignty. And that is the one thing that I wanted to talk to people about. So when you're talking to your communities and your your community elected leaders or your city councils, they still have a responsibility to respect tribal sovereignty, as municipalities do not have legal jurisdiction over tribes. And then finally, we need to encourage these communities to practice partnership. So in addition to tribes, national and local nonprofits serving Native people are good potential partners for municipalities. Coordination can help prevent duplication as well as to help extend the reach of local government efforts. So partnering with tribal nations can lead to improvements in education, housing, and roads that benefit everyone in the community. Anything you want to add?
I think so.
Oh, Jason wants me to give the example. It says a true example of the solidarity dividend in action is one of the best examples of tribal partnerships with local communities was during the COVID-19 pandemic, when tribes health clinics led the country in providing vaccinations to everyone, not just their tribal members. A list of municipal case studies appears later in this guide that shows examples of how tribes and cities have worked together on issues from public safety to economic development to land return.
And that even happened in North Carolina, the Meherrin Nation up by Ahoskie, North Carolina. They got through the Indian Health and the CARES Act or whatever, they got vaccinations first because we were losing elders across the country at a high rate. So when we lose our elders, we lose our language bases, we lose our stories, we lose things that we're still fighting to bring back and preserve.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just not our way to keep anything given to ourselves. And so they just opened it to the community. Anybody that needed to be vaccinated got vaccinated. And that was like weeks or months before Walgreens or any of these other places had available vaccinations for non-native people.
So we're just talking about the history of Turtle Island. Maybe in 6 months we'll come out with how Indigenous peoples worldwide can relate to each other. But right now we're just focusing on the United States. So
Not Turtle Island. It's just
yeah,
middle of it.
it's just the middle of it. So account for the history of harm and erasure, right? So we have these contact periods. And we're going to go over a brief synopsis of the history of the United States tribal relations that are violent, dehumanizing. It was horrible treatment of Indigenous people by the United States government, state governments, and local governments throughout U.S. history. And this history is far from exhaustive, what I listed here. What I would like to tell everybody is this is just a federal version of it. in each tribal community, there was this going on, harming like other tribes that are not federally recognized. So for example, in Virginia and North Carolina, there's this man named Walter Pleckler, around the 1890s to the 1920s. He did a eugenics movement and erased people's race, changing them from Indian to Black or white. So we'll talk about that later. So the first part is pre-contact. That is anything before Europeans, Spanish, French came here, right? You know, we were trading north and south. You know, we traveled all over doing trading. And there's evidence in that in some of the burial mounds that they have excavated. And it shows the different types of currency that people use to trade.
And I'll say pre-predatory contact, because there is histories of trade and stuff happening from communities across the sea prior to what we call the predatory contact, which is late 1400s to
now. Natalia, so I will tell you that right now, we're working on New Zealand and Australia, and a couple of other South Pacific islands, learning about their practices. So let's talk about contact. So as various Euro-Western countries reached what is now called the continental United States, encounters with Indian communities began with goodwill and trade, but conflicts often followed. Europeans also made alliances with tribes against each other, so they're already causing division, right? Conflicts like the French and Indian War, the 7-Year War. Let me see here. Hold on. The next we have is the treaty making era. So that is from 1778 to 1871. So just the mindset is after the formation of the United States.
there were treaties prior with the European countries.
There's treaties prior with the European countries.
They're supposed to honor, right?
They chose not to honor those treaties, even though it's the same people, they chose not to honor them. That is where most of the Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, East Coast tribes are.
Were terminated.
So Europeans signed first treaties with Indian tribes in the early 1600s, right? Treaties between the US government and Indian tribes established a pattern of legal and political interactions starting in 1778 with the Delaware tribe. And in 1871, when the treaty-making era formally ended, the US had signed more than 350 treaties with Indian tribes. After 1871, there were many written agreements between tribes in the United States which functioned like treaties. But we know that they have not honored some of their treaties.
No, they haven't honored one, not one.
Not one. The next period will be the removal era, which is the 1830s to the 1850s. Now remember, there's a lot going on in history with the United States. You got slavery, you have the Civil War. This is when President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. Removal policies during the period removed many tribes from their eastern homelands to lands west of the Mississippi and Indian territory, especially now what is known as Oklahoma. Do you want to tell them what that means? Oklahoma?
Oklahoma is a Chata-Anumpa word or Choctaw word. Okla is the people. And when I greeted you, I said, Oklasia, I am from the people. And Homa is just a word for red. In Louisiana, we have a band of Choctaw descendants called the Homa Nation. And they were called the Red Crawfish people originally. And so Oklahoma, the fact that they would call this territory where they're going to put the red people, it's one of those harm, it's one of those harm things, right? Causes harm.
So some of these tribes from the East Coast agreed to move west to protect their interests. Those who resisted were forced to go by gunpoint by the US military. The troops did not give adequate time to gather their belongings or food, and the American Indian homes were later looted, right? Losing all of everything that they owned. Removals included children and elders, and many died because of starvation or disease or exposure to the elements. One of the most cases that everybody knows about is the Trail of Tears, where the 5 civilized tribes marched more than 5,000 miles. And the 5 civilized tribes are the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole. And we can have a later conversation exploring what does that mean to be a civilized tribe, but we won't discuss that today.
But we could have more talks about why we're only taught about that trail and not all the years of
Other
forced
trails.
relocations that went on for decades after.
The next one is the reservation system. So that is the period between 1850 and 1891. So between the removal and the allotment area. So you have to know the removal, the reservation system, and then the allotment and assimilation era. So between 1850 and 1891, numerous treaties, statutes, and executive orders were made that required Indian tribes to relocate to distant territories or confine them to smaller areas that were reserved portions of their original territories. And what I'm trying to tell you is sometimes tribes were forced together to be on the same reservation, even though they did not get along or they may have been enemies. They were forced together in this smaller period. During this time, state passed laws that discriminated against Native peoples. Also in 1850, the California legislature passed the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians that enabled whites to legally enslave Native people. This is in 1850. The law made loitering and vagrancy criminal offenses punishable by indentured servitude. Any white person could pay a Native person's bail, then compel them to work off the debt. In 1860, amendments were passed that legalized forced servitude of a period of 10 years for Native people accused of vagrancy. These laws also allowed for white settlers to gain control of Native children and force them into indentured servitude by filing a court petition claiming the child was an orphan or that the parents had agreed to the arrangement. This law was also used to enslave Black children using the same methods. This act was not fully reversed until 1937. So in North Carolina, my cousin Beverly Scarlett told me about these laws called the bastardization laws. And that is what they did. They totally made our children or our youth indentured servants if you did not have parents or your parents could not care for you.
They were single parents.
And so Leticia, I will put that in the chat. The next era that we're going to talk about is the allotment and assimilation era. This is when the General Allotment Act came, which is essentially called the Dawes Act, which was passed in 1887. And it resulted in tribes losing 90 million of their 138 million acres of reservation lands. The Dawes Act was further amended by the Curtis Act of 1898 to include the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Muskogee, Cherokee, and Seminole tribes, and now what is known as Eastern Oklahoma. It broke up communal reservation lands and assigned individual parcels or allotments to tribal members. These parcels, generally held in trust by the United States for 25 years, could not be sold or otherwise conveyed. This is right around that time when the Osage murders, right around that time when it started to happen.
The Black Wall Street.
Black Wall Street crumbled in Oklahoma.
It was massacred.
Yeah, it was massacred. There's also other lands that I kind of wanted to talk about. So after tribal members received their allotments, the remaining reservation land was declared a surplus and was open to non-Indian settlement. As a result, trust lands, fee lands, and lands owned by tribes individual Indians and non-Indians are mixed together on reservations, creating this thing called a checkerboard. Checkerboard lands pose a range of challenges, including jurisdictional issues, lack of access to traditional areas for subsistence or ceremonial reasons, impairment of economic activities. This era is also characterized by the government-sponsored efforts to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream American society. Many Native American children were sent to boarding schools. So this is when the boarding school era really started, separating them from their families and tribes. And they were sent to these schools where they were forced to not speak their language. They were forced to stop dressing in their traditional regalia or their way of dress. They cut their hair. And they were, our people were just mistreated in these boarding schools, abused, death, at the hands of these school leaders and staff. I don't know if you know, but now they're uncovering so many children who were buried in unmarked graves at these boarding schools. And now they're having the acts of bringing these children back home. And again, we can talk further about this later. The next act is called the Reorganization Policy. That is from the 1930s to the 1953s. And this is right around the time that my grandparents, who will be teenagers. So through assimilation efforts, so remember, they're assimilating, they want people to acculturate into mainstream. Through these assimilation efforts, the next phase of the federal government policy toward indigenous peoples supported the reorganization of Indian tribes. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, called the IRA, ended the allotment of reservations, ensured that any allotted parcels still held in trust for individual Indians would not convert to a fee simple status, and reaffirmed that tribal governments had inherent powers. This act also provided a mechanism for the formalization of a tribal government through written constitutions and charters for tribes that would agree to federal oversight. Now, adopting this policy into your tribe meant you had to impose a model of tribal governance based on a corporate structure. So basically, it was a business model that the United States was pushing onto tribes. So they went from unwritten rules about how to govern themselves to they had to put it all down on paper. And this is how traditional tribal democratic systems started. Also, they would put federal oversight, people like BIA officers in your community to oversee what you were doing. And so you had to get permission from those officers or agents to do anything you wanted to do in your tribe. Which leads us into the termination and relocation era, which is the 1953 and 1968. So remember how I told you there was a lot of tribes leaving, not tribes, a lot of indigenous people leaving the tribal communities. This is during this relocation era that was happening, which is also right around the civil rights time. So AIM became big during this time. American Indian movement. Yeah, you're right, Jane. So the termination era, relocation era, Congress passed Concurrent Resolution 108 in 1953, which called for the ending the special federal relationship with tribes and terminating their status. More than 100 tribes were terminated under this policy. The policy intended to further promote the assimilation of Native Americans into mainstream American society. So again, trying to acculturate Indians into a white dominant narrative, making us forget who we were, where we came from, the ties that we had to the land. However, termination led to a loss of federal services and resources for the tribes, as well as more than 1 million acres of trust land. About 50 tribes were able to restore their federally recognized status by an act of Congress, executive order, or because the conditions of termination were not met before the policy ended. Also in 1953, Public Law 280 was passed, which transferred federal criminal jurisdiction and some civil jurisdiction to certain states, over tribal lands and their boundaries. So again, this complicated a lot of jurisdictional issues caused by allotment policies. The policy also encouraged individual Native Americans to move from their rural tribes to metropolitan areas such as Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, Cleveland, and Seattle. Once relocated, American Indians faced a lack of prominent or promised employment, as well as discrimination and the loss of the traditional cultural support. So again, like I'm thinking this long term, this is again during my mom's time frame and my aunt's time frame where they're encouraging people to leave the community. This is happening in our community. Like I'm seeing this, even though this is happening to federal tribes that are on this federal land, this is also happening in tribal communities on the East Coast. And then if Indians returned back home, many found that they no longer fit with those who stayed in the reservations or on family allotments. Huh? Okay. The next one is the self-determination era, 1968 to present. So, I mean, that's a huge gap. So again, in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, federal Indian policy began to support the concept of Indian self-determination. Various laws and executive orders strengthened support for tribal governments and reaffirmed federal acknowledgement of tribal sovereignty. So here are some of the laws that have been passed. So the Native American Programs Act, Indian Child Welfare Act, which is called ICWA. Thought we were going to lose it last year, but we somehow saved it. The Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Freedom Act of 1978. The Indian Arts and Crafts Act. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And then Tribal Law and Order Act. So these were things that that really helped these federal laws. And then here in the 2000s, we had the Violence Against Women Act. Are you really giving me the time check?
Well,
so those are some things that we wanted to talk about. So like to try to bring you through this. And I know we're going through this super fast, but this really helped me click in how to think about these things. So again, Jason, I don't know if you want to talk about, I just listed out the tribes across Turtle Island. So, that includes Canada and Mexico.
Well, I would just say that, a lot of this she's pulling from these libraries of academia, European academia, and it's all data related and all of these things are true. All of these dates are true, but there's a little bit of like not understanding the personal stories of your own indigenous elders of what the times were like. So prior to that 1978 Religious Freedom Act, we still had our elders and our medicine people and our holy people still trying to make sure that our practices were going to the children and the grandchildren. And if they were caught, the minimum charge was a 10-year sentence. So, if you go to Alcatraz Island today and visit the old prison, you go to cells and they'll say, this was Al Capone's cell, this was Dillinger, this was all these like famous bank robbers and mafia hitmen and stuff. And then you go to these cells and they'll be like, well, who was this guy? Oh, this was just a native guy. What was he in prison for? Well, he was still speaking his language and he was still praying in his natural form. And he was still trying to preserve that so that they wouldn't lose those languages and those ways to pray as a people. And they put them in these horrific prison situations. And so the other thing you don't get is like, while you're picking off these iconic parts of family and community, you're like devastating. I don't know, you're kind of like ensuring the devastation of the family unit to be successful.
Yeah.
And so that's like the fact that we're here, the fact that we're all here to have this dialogue, to be able to have these discussions. It's a very powerful thing. Some faith-believing people would say it is a miracle, right? All of these things were done in all of these time periods, and that nations of people survived, still here to tell the story, and are still here to, try to get a semblance of their dignity and culture back, like through speaking our languages, through doing our practices, cultural practices. And so I just wanted to say thank you all for being who've remained on this call, because sometimes it's painful to hear these things, but you gotta, it's like if we don't talk about these things, then we're for sure to hurt our own great grandchildren in the future.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about our own indigenous great grandchildren. I'm talking about as a society, we're gonna hurt our children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren, because all of these practices, I mean, look at the voting going on right now. Look at the trying to stifle education. I mean, if given the choice, the money and powers that be would go right back to these oppressive practices tomorrow, because it worked for them. They remained in control and they remained rich. So they're not really worried about how we all figure it out and scramble and work it all out. They're just trying to stay rich. And I'll just stop there.
So I just wanted to kind of break up the tribes across Turtle Island. So we talked about people being federally recognized, state recognized, not recognized. There's no one culture, language, or history among these many thousands of tribes. Nations have historically been divided into regions loosely based on cultural similarities. But language groups, following centuries of colonialism, including forced relocations, urbanization policies, regional categorization should not be considered absolute, but a guide to understanding the inherently diversity in Indian country. And so we've broken them up into like the Arctic, the subarctic, the Northeast, the Southeast, which is us here on the, Virginia and North Carolina, South Carolina, the Plains, the Great Basin, the Southwest. Also, there's California tribes, because that's a huge state. The Northwest Coast, and the one that I forgot to put on here was called the Plateau, which is Western Canada, specifically British Columbia to the United States. And again, borders or boundaries didn't exist. So, sometimes they divided a tribe or they put a state right through a tribe. So, or territory. So, I mean, it's really difficult. So just keep in mind, we're not a monolith. I did want to kind of share some data with you. So today's Indigenous community challenges, we did a community survey over the last year. We had 124 participants, and they talked about these are the issues that they thought was the challenges. So MMIWP, so that stands for Missing Murdered Indigenous People, also known as MMIW, G2S, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirits. Physical and mental health of Indigenous people, homelessness and housing insecurity, policing, language and culture loss, and then the urban experience. So those were, we just asked them what were the main community challenges, and this is the ones that they listed.
And I'm surprised nobody put addictions on there.
Yeah, it is pretty bad.
Or suicides.
So how cities, towns, and communities can address these challenges. So as you can see, I put a list on our I put a list. I put a map on here, and this map shows 2020 census data. And as you can see, in 2020, North Carolina was the second most populous Indigenous community this side or east of the Mississippi. And I can also give you more statistics. Like I actually probably will send out a report later with the statistics. We just need to finish compiling them. So how can cities address these challenges, cities, towns, and communities? again, we're still living here in these communities. We are diverse across the nation with many tribes and communities. We also have different tribal people living in different communities. So like Jason is Choctaw, but he married me, so he's now living in my community. We don't want to discredit him, any of his Choctawness, even though he's Okanichi. But again, you know, municipal governments or these town governments can make a difference for these indigenous residents. I will tell you on the Bucky's call, or actually I talked to a city councilman, and he brought up, well, why are people not participating in our race diversity committee? And I'm like, well, for one, they didn't know about it. And two, most of our people live in their tribal communities. There may be a few people living in the city of that town, but most of all, people are still living in the tribal communities. One, because they still have their houses that were passed down from their grandparents or elders. And two, it costs a lot to live in these little towns. Housing insecurity, like you can't get a affordable house for anything. And some of these case studies that showed up, which I will again share in a follow-up email. One is keeping communities safe. Two is restoring the environment. Three, keeping communities healthy. Four, achieving land return. Five, addressing and resolving missing and murdered Indigenous people. Six, supporting economic development. So those are some case studies that we can talk about. And I want to get here because we got like a few minutes left, and I want to open this up for conversation. So formal nation to nation municipal relations, right? So what can you do, right? Have these land acknowledgements, but don't let them be performative. Secondly, recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. And then improving outcomes for Native residents who live in the city. So I will tell you that North Carolina, along with Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, Utah, Virginia, and Washington have made the change. Cities like, how do you say this word? Tempe and Portland, Maine made the change with the support of Indigenous city council members passing these formal resolutions. So these are some ways that people can incorporate into their municipal relations.
Minimal
ways. So here's this list of additional recommended reading. So an Indigenous People's History by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The State of the Native Nations, Conditions under U.S. Policies of Self-Determination. Oh, I didn't spell bury. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. God is Red, A Native View of Religion, and then There by Tommy Orange. Anything you want to add?
No, I want to get to the dialogue because we lost 5 people.
It's okay. People wrote us and said they were leaving early.
Okay.
I'm just letting y'all know Jason was panicking, talking about people were leaving. So just acknowledgements. If you want to reach out to have us talk about it, please reach out to us. And then these are the references that we use for this. So the National Cities League Roadmap to Repair, the Tribal Institute, NCAI, and then NARF, which stands for the Native American Rights Fund. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jay to lead us in a conversation. And thank you so much for coming and listening to our talk.
I do have one thing that just came to me is when we were doing the MVP resistance work, and I don't want to say when we were because we're still doing it, it was fundamental to have the Indigenous, African descendant, European descendant, Asian, Middle East. It was fundamental to have people from all nations in a line, in solidarity, saying the same thing. I guarantee that if just one of those, subgroups, whatever you want to call them, identities, I think it's silly, right? one of those subsets of human people that should just be considered human two-legged people. But because we deal with money and money is broken down in division and divisiveness, we've got these subgroups that we call and label these people. If we didn't have these labels of people in solidarity with one voice and one mind saying the same thing, we would have not had the success that we've had. I credit it, and even the ones that were working and fighting the MVP years before we got in it have told me that made all the difference in the world, because you go with your own identity group to the White House and say, well, me and my little community of homeowners are upset. You need to do something for us. And they're like, get out of here. And then we'd go, no, you're on our territory and treaty land. You need to fix this. And they'd be like, oh, get out of here. But when all of us show up, oh, you're messing with formerly enslaved burial grounds and historic Black churches. When we all come together and we all have our personal reasons, but our common message, it was extremely, extremely successful. And I believe that can be duplicated in everything we want to promote for our future generations: education, economics, all of these things, sustainability, environmental preservation. I believe it's the way to go. I'll get.
Okay, so any questions, any thoughts? Is there anything that is invoking your feelings? Remember the courageous conversation here. And we are in a safe space. So yeah, Jay.
Nobody's getting off mute, but I just want to say I recognize Beverly Scarlett right there. Hey. Yeah.
Dominique says Audible has some of these books for free with their monthly membership. That is true.
So you become a member and you're able to get to these books.
Mm-hmm. I will send this reading list over email to everyone. And then I'll send out a recording of this as well. So yeah. And I thank you all for being here. I can't believe nobody has any questions.
It's because you're recording it. I guarantee if you hadn't recorded it, people would be feeling safer.
Leticia has their hand raised, and who else? Somebody else.
I do. I'm used to being in recorded meetings, so it's good. So how often, this is the first thing I've heard of it, and I'm so glad that I came because I learned so much. I literally have like a page full of notes from you guys. So I appreciate you. But how often do you do these? And sorry, that's my grandbaby throwing a fit in the back. How often do you guys do these? And are they generally open like this?
So this is the first one. Well, we do this racial day of healing. We've done it every year
for 4 years.
For 4 years for Martin Luther King. That's like one of our acts of service. But this is the first one where we've really talked about Indigenous issues before. So yeah.
And it's because she's been here for 2 weeks at this law school, just getting all like taking it with a water hose, all this information.
Okay, so the next one is Lobo.
So I just wanted to call out Letty, also known, she has Leticia up here, but we all call her Letty. So she's actually the chairwoman of La Mesa, which is a Brown Beret Coalition, and I got a bunch of Brown Berets to join tonight because I really want to see what you guys had to say and get us all working together.
That sounds good. Thank you for doing that.
So I'll just say one thing that we've always known and are just now really expressing is that all of those southern continent, central continent, southern part of this northern continent are all indigenous folk. And we can call them all kinds of things. We can call them Caribbean, we can call them Central American, South America, we can call them whatever. We can call them rainforest folk. We can call them Chicano, Mexica, all of those terms. Those are indigenous terms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next we're going to go to Dominique.
Hey y'all. Okay, I know this is like a heavy hitting question, but I've always wondered you know, when y'all started like working with, you said like, you know, uh, people in West Virginia and Virginia who may or may not be indigenous and working like to fight against things like MVP. How was the process of opening those dialogues, especially with people who may have anti-indigenous or anti-Black sentiment and trying to kind of get to the same goal and work together? How was that?
They were very respectful, and I think it's just because how we carried ourselves.
Yeah.
We practiced our own things. We came with an empty plate. We asked for permission and we were waiting to be invited. We always came with love and prayer. And then when it was time to get down to the nitty gritty, we came full warrior. Like we didn't ask permission. And so they respected us for that.
Okay, next we have Joe Gonzalez.
Oh, excuse me, I was trying to unmute myself. No, I wanted to thank you all for having this open platform and all the knowledge that you shared in such a short amount of time.
So it was a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot to take in. We're talking about, you know, hundreds of years and one of the things I wanted to just relate to is one of us as Chicanos, and my name is Joe Gonzalez. I'm with Los Brown Berets, and I also have the Eagle and Condor Coalition, which is bringing us all together. It's exactly what you all are doing today. It was real inspiring. But we have to, when we take in consideration tribes, we have to be inclusive of all Turtle Island tribes, all 4 directions, and not exclude our island brothers and sisters also. You know, so many of them. But it's hard to get recognized, and usually they'll say, well, you're just a Chicano. Well, you know, I'm proud to call myself a Chicano. But wait, I'm proud to call myself a Limpana Apache too.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's always discrimination on both sides of this imaginary border. And that's what we need to do, is really erase all those misconceptions and learn how to work together. And it's not easy, but we're slowly making progress. And I just wanted to thank you all, and thank you, Lobo, for inviting me today. So, aho.
Thank you so much, Joe. The next one is Danny Lynn Hunter.
And thank you for the Buc-ee's meeting, Danny Lynn, by the way. That was some work right there.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having us. Thank you so much for sharing all of the knowledge and wisdom today. One question that I would have is, I would love to hear your thoughts on what a non-performative land acknowledgement statement would look like.
She's written one.
So like, just in my opinion, in a non-performative land acknowledgement means you just go beyond that. Like you have to take that step further. So like, I'll give you an example. There's a college that keeps inviting me to come over there and to give these land acknowledgements. However, after about the 4th one, I just added something more to be like, we need to go beyond a land acknowledgement. We need to go to land back, right? Like, you are occupying the land of my ancestors and our current tribe. You should be in participation or in partnership with the tribe to work on giving some of that land back, because you are a very famous private university. You're making millions of dollars on tuition. And, you know, who's laughing at me over here? Like, I'm just saying, like,
So yeah, basically the land acknowledgement that says you guys are great and honored people and contribution, but doesn't say we're gonna start offering something, right? Some educational opportunities, some land back opportunities,
yeah,
some economic opportunities. It's very weak when it's just like, thank you for suffering 500 years so we could all be here in Kumbaya.
yeah.
You know, if I were to say that, you'd think that was a very weak land acknowledgement, but that's basically what they do.
Yeah. And so we talk about working together environmental issues, and just not being here to say, oh, we welcome you to this land and that's it. Like, we need to have more conversations about that. So, yeah. Okay, up next is Lucas.
Hey, y'all. Good evening. Good to be here.
Alito, brother.
Thank you so much. Crystal, yeah, when you're bringing up some of the just understandings with tribes, this is Okanichi Band of Supporting Nation within, and I'm curious at that level of relationship outside of like the continued obvious occupation of lands and violations of energy infrastructure and whatnot. Are there particular violations that like a tribe experiences and that form of state recognition from like municipalities and localities that is like a common occurrence that you see kind of across the board on Turtle Island for in that particular case of tribal identity?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's clear. I'm trying to figure out how to like.
It's very clear. So one of the things that I'll just let you know, and this is a big secret, we're not afforded any of those federal things. So our bones, even our children's bones are not protected. Our desecration is not protected. We don't even apply for me and Crystal adopted our 6-year-old nephew because his tribe doesn't have access to ICWA, but the child welfare systems will honor ICWA if there is a state recognized tribe or relative willing to step up. So we had to step up so he wouldn't go to the system. So all of those federal things were like you hear, especially on the internet, oh, you people should be happy, the government has to bow down when they do certain things. It's like, no, they don't. For one, they don't even bow down to the ones that they have those treaties with, but the ones that they don't honor the treaties, either because they were from previous European governments or they were successfully terminated, or like Joe said, they're in a different country that they deal with their indigeneity a whole different way, right? So the reason I said I'm keeping that a secret to you is because Crystal and I don't operate that way. When we hear the word sovereign, we believe we're sovereign. We don't need anybody's card to tell us we're sovereign.
Yeah.
We don't need anybody's presidential stamp to tell us we're sovereign. We say that these are human rights. And if you wouldn't dig up any baby's bones, why are you going to dig up our baby's bones? If you wouldn't put any baby in danger, why are you going to put our babies in danger?
Yeah.
So we just believe that we have all these rights and we keep pushing through like we do. And it ain't easy, but we've been quite successful that way.
Yeah. And the reason why, Lucas, that some tribes are kind of nervous or scared is because, they don't want to lose
A perception of something that they don't even have.
Right. Like they think that they're going to get some magical carrot that the state government or the federal government is dangling in front of them. And I'm like, you need to go out and create your own economic opportunity, whether that is having some type of food system or you're selling something, something that is going to promote the well-being of your community as well as economic success. Like, we have to think outside of the box on some of these issues.
We got one last question.
Okay. Yeah, we got one last question, 2 minutes. So
Or one, maybe
Farrar.
there's 2 hands up. Maybe we can get 1 minute each.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking my question. This was amazing. And maybe this is really too long a question for this session, so perhaps we could have another one. And again, I apologize if I had to step away for a few minutes, so if you already covered this. But what does land back look like for us as people who are occupying indigenous land, but we're not at least intentional party to the atrocities?
You're just allies with us, right? Like, you are working with us, you're volunteering with us, you're having these courageous conversations with other like universities, these land grab universities, like NC State, for one, is a land grab university.
So
what else?
I just want to say really quick, people think land back is like we go back and take the spot that we had when there was nothing but us here. And that's not what land back means. For one, if you put us in control of it and we are in control from an indigenous lens, everybody occupying that, regardless of culture, religion, gender, they are going to be taken care of because they're on that land.
Mhm.
You are our neighbor now. You live next to us.
Yep.
So if you were to give me Mebane, let's say, I'd kick Buc-ee's out and I'd create a community center that all our kids can play in, and they could grow seeds in, and they can learn what it means to grow their own food and not spray any chemicals on it. So land back means just put the people that right now are responsible for like 70% of the
Yep.
environmental preservation. Even though we're like a small population globally, we got these little pockets, but where we are, the water's clean, the earth is clean, and they keep trying to push us and move us. If you put those people in control of the land back,
Mhm.
all the people, all the neighbors, all the relatives are going to be cared for, because that's just how we roll.
Yep.
And there was one more question. I think Leticia had another
Yep.
one. The last one.
I'll make it quick. I know you guys are running super short on time, but I wanted to point out the fact that we also need to be super courageous in pointing out those infiltrators, like you guys have mentioned before. We have, there's some tribes here who have problems with their elected leaders and all the funding all of a sudden disappearing, and people don't know where that funding goes. So then you have to be able to, I guess, be unafraid and use that courage to be forward and call them out and know that just because they're saying this is for your own good, I'm doing this for the good of our people, you need to realize that that is genuinely not the case a lot of the time. When they want to pass a law and your tribe is like, yeah, let's do it, they're going to give us $1 million. Okay, but read the fine print. Because a lot of
Yeah.
those laws and a lot of those bills are saying in there that you have to, the tribe itself has to sign away their sovereignty to
Yeah.
allow for those bills to be passed for those tribes to allow to benefit from that. So
Mhm.
these are
Okay.
things that they don't realize, and the government purposely creates a region to where tribes are poor, and they do this so they're dependent on them by force, not by choice. We were doing fine before they got here, right?
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden it's like, oh well, we need these grants, we need this money, we need that money, we need this, we need that. Without you, we all of a sudden can't survive. But they've created that environment, and we need to realize that it's a very hard thing, and it's a very scary thing at times to dig into those laws and to dig into that fine print. And it's tiresome because I've done it. And it's literally just frustrating when you start getting into there and you see your tribal leaders telling you this is going to be really good, this is going to be really good, and then you get down to that one tiny sub paragraph that says, oh, by the way, you're only going to get this money if your tribe signs away their sovereignty, and they're never going to get it back.
Mhm.
You know, and
So-
that's how they also erase people.
So what she is talking about is the fact that we're all conditioned to this colonization. And so all the corruption, it's in our communities, all the lying, all the greed, all the selling each other out for money, all the backbiting, all the crawling over each other like crabs in a bowl in a bucket. We are all susceptible of it because of hundreds and hundreds of years of conditioning to it. So it means you kind of have to, however you believe, have a spiritual internal place where you set yourself above those weaknesses. It's just like those of us that had addictions with alcohol or drugs. It was very easy to get in this country, right? Very easy, right? And very accepted. But we had to go somewhere deep and say, that helped to kill my people, right? And it's the same thing with conduct, personal conduct. Call each other. If you see theft, if you see greed, if you see abuse of the children, if you see abuse of the women, these are hard conversations to have because it's our own relatives, right? But our own relatives need to be called out so they can heal. If you go back to like 30-year-old convicts and their life is totally changed, but if nobody ever stopped them in the tracks, they'd still be, 60, 70-year-old convicts. So we just have to be brave and courageous with each other, hold each other accountable. And we love you all. Sorry, we're 4 minutes over. We're going to give you your life back. And remember to honor the legacy and memory of the Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe he was a chosen one sent down to us. And there's many chosen ones that will never hear their name, probably many on this call. So Yakoki Ishto, thank you. We love you.
Alewa, everybody. Alewa.
Free Leonard.
Alewa.